This is John for ChicagoPatch.com and John's Beat. I'm here with Jon Kitley talking about Flashback Weekend and his horror career. How are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm good.
Let me start. I love the term. Your label is cinematic archaeologist.
Yeah.
What exactly is that?
Well, being a horror fan for pretty much my entire life, the main thing that I've always done, and I kind of preach, is always look back. So it's not just the new movies that are coming out. It's that if you're that big of a horror fan, you really need to do your research and look back. So the archaeologist term comes in as you're always digging around finding old stuff. So I always encourage newer fans to look at the films that came before, the old films, going all the way back to the silent films, because there's always great entertainment and horror in these films, whether it's from the 40s, the 60s, the 70s, no matter what. So I'm always encouraging fans to always keep digging because you will find some incredible cinema that came out years and decades before.
So let me ask you then. I was going to get to this later, but I'll shoot you the question now. What would be two or three of your underrated but really good films that you have discovered?
Oh, well, a few years ago, I came across 10 Rillington Place, which is based on the real life serial killer in England, which changed their capital punishment. Um, I had never even heard of it before, stumbled across it, and it just blew me away. But there's always really good films. Another one of my favorites is The Body Snatcher from Robert Wise from 1945 that has Boris Karloff in a very different role than what he's known for because he's not in makeup. He's just a really evil, demented guy, but he gives an incredible performance. So it's just these little gems like that that might be off the beaten path, but are well worth seeking out.
And you're also a fan of horror books, if I've read correctly on your website. You like discovering old horror or even new horror books.
Yeah, I'm a huge nonfiction book collector because, again, I started before the internet, so that's how we learned about movies and stuff, or the good old fashioned books. But I've always found that the more you learn about a film or a filmmaker, the more you can appreciate what they're doing. Because even some of the cheesier or films that are not necessarily, Oscar caliber, but when you realize the struggles that the filmmakers had with either no money or dealing with certain actors or makeup problems, it doesn't make the film better, but it gives you a little bit more appreciation of the craft and what these guys had to go through. So actually, the films become a little bit more entertaining because you have that more knowledge going into it. So I'm a big stickler for reading up on the history of the cinema and horror films and like I said, just the directors and stuff because you can learn a lot more. Which then, when you see the films, you technically see a lot more.
But you've written some books as well, right?
I've written a couple of essays in a couple of different books, Horror 101 and then Hidden Horror. And then in 2019, I published my own book called Discover the Horror, which is sort of an autobiographical. It's half autobiographical, and then it's half me just talking about the horror genre and different ways to become a better fan, doing more research, seeking out different films. Um, my love of the drive-in. There's a big section on movie conventions that I've been going to for over 30 years. So it's just kind of a reminiscing of what I've gone through and how I've gotten to where I'm at now.
Well, without giving away the entire book, how did you get started in the industry?
Well, I've always been a fan, and back in the early '90s, I think I started setting up at movie conventions, selling whatever I could find, videotapes or posters and stuff. Eventually, I moved into selling books, horror reference books, and that's what I've been doing for quite some time. But I've been a vendor at shows since the mid '90s, and I go to usually probably about 6 or 8 conventions a year. Either usually setting up as a vendor, but also just going to have fun because I'm still a fan. But yeah, I started going to Flashback at the very first one. I think it was 2002.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, and I've been at every one of them, and I like what Mike and Mia are doing. They really create a decent show for fans, um, given the opportunity to see a lot of these cool guests, and I know Mike and them from the drive-in, the Midway drive-in that they run, which I am a huge fan of the drive-in. So I love what they're doing there as well.
No, I love Flashback Weekend. I've known Mike and Mia for a lot of years. I love going to Flashback. I think it's a fantastic convention. What can people look forward to seeing at your booth at Flashback?
Uh, I come by books. I have a lot of horror reference books. That's usually what I'm trying to sell. I know my market is smaller because people are usually looking to buy Blu-rays and toys and stuff, which is fine. But if you're looking for something to be able to learn about the horror genre, come see me and I can help you out.
Will you be selling your books there as well?
Yes, I will have my book there as well, and I will sign for free.
So, at Flashback, who have been some of the horror icons that you've met that you've really enjoyed meeting at Flashback?
Lance Henriksen comes to mind because he was just so down to earth and so friendly. And here I grew up watching him, in Terminator and Aliens and all that. And then you just sit there and have a conversation with him about the most mundane thing or whatever. And he was just so friendly. At one show, they had Kim Darby, who is an older actress, but she was in Don't Be Afraid of the Dark from the 70s, which scared the crap out of me. So it was nice talking to her, relating my childhood terror that she helped develop. It's always nice to see Robert Englund there, and it's funny too because, or even I know they have Kane Hodder. As an older fan, I'll be in there, and the one show that Lance Henriksen was at, he had like hardly anybody at his line, but Kane Hodder had one just down the block basically, and it gets frustrating because you're like, that's Lance Henriksen, he's a god. Why does Kane Hodder have all these fans? But then when you think about it, younger fans are going to be usually Friday the 13th fans.
Right.
And if you're a Friday the 13th fan, Kane Hodder is the god. He's the man. So that's why they gravitate towards people like him, which after a while, when you understand that, it doesn't bother me as much. And I'm grateful that Kane is getting the attention because he's done amazing things in the genre. But it's always nice when you see the fans kind of progress and get older and realize that some of these older stars are a pretty big deal to begin with too.
No, I totally agree. One of the movies that scared the bejesus out of me when I was a youngster, and probably still now, was Trilogy of Terror.
Oh yeah.
Do you think our horror movies now, just as scary, or do you think sometimes the special effects kind of take away a little bit of modernization?
I think it's a little of both. I think the modern ones, and especially coming from Hollywood, and I just hate to say this, but they get a little too lazy. We'll just throw in some jump scares, or we'll do this, and a really good horror film. I'll give you an example. If you walk out of a theater and all you remember is that you jumped, it was a good movie. Well, what was really scary? Oh, I jumped. But like a film like Halloween, there's weeks later that film is still bothering you, and I think that's the difference between really good horror and something that just has a popcorn horror where you're going to jump, you're going to scream, but it's not really going to be an iconic film 20 years from now. Where when you walk out of Halloween or even the original Nightmare on Elm Street, I mean, that sits in your brain and affects you for weeks upon end. So that's I miss that in today's films. Not to say that they're out there. There's not ones out there, but they just seem a little bit fewer and far between, at least coming in the States. If you go outside the country, there's a lot of stuff that being done in Spain and other parts that make really effective films, really creep you out.
Are there old movies that you can watch again and again and again that still, I mean, obviously you're not quite as scared as the first, scare, but it still kind of freak you out?
Oh yeah, Night of the Living Dead. It still amazes me to watch that. And again, learning more and more about it, learning that the budget they had and how they actually did it with people that were not actors. They were just people that they could find that were willing to help. 1963's The Haunting, the original black and white with Robert Wise, that still creeps me out. That movie is so effective. It's black and white. You never see any real ghosts. They never tell you that there's real ghosts. It's just what you perceive. And I still think that's as effective today as it was back then. Yeah, I can watch that all the time. And even going back to the classics, the Universal stuff, Frankenstein and them, it makes me feel like a kid again watching those.
I couldn't agree more. Are there any projects you're currently working on or in the near future?
I'm a staff writer for Horror Hound magazine, so I'm always coming up with something interesting, or trying to come up with something interesting for them. But I'm still working on another book project, but that's still in the early stages to really announce anything. But I'm still working on my website, kitleyscrypt.com, which I've been running for 22 years now. No, 24 years now. And you'll always see me usually at movie conventions, and I'm always hanging out at the Music Box Theater in Chicago, and they have their little double features or their marathons. So, and the drive-in, always hanging out at the drive-in.
You know, I love your website. I love Kitley's Crypt. The one cool part where you explain how you changed websites and you ended up going to blog form. You were a little hesitant at first, but then you realized that you could do everything you still want in
Right.
your website. What could people expect to find on your website?
I do movie reviews, I do book reviews, soundtrack reviews, but then I also try to highlight things. The one thing I've always done on the site is I want it to be different than any other site. You're not going to see advertisements. You're not going to see me trying. If I'm promoting something, it's because I really believe in it. So if I'm reviewing a book, I'm going to be honest about it. I'm not trying to sell it to you. I don't sell things through my website for that reason. I want people to come and know that they're coming to either get my reviews or just events that are happening around that I think people need to know about. Because it's important to support these events and conventions, because if they don't have the support, they're going to stop happening. So if you're a movie fan, a horror fan, and there's double features playing at the drive-in or at the local theater, you got to go out and support them, because otherwise they'll go away.
I agree completely, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you. I want to, obviously I'm not on the payroll. I'm just doing this because I really believe in what you do. I believe in what Flashback Weekend does, and I want everybody out there to come and see it. Before I let you go, tell everybody where they can find you, give out your website link, whatever you'd like, sir.
Kitleyscrypt.com. So it's www.kitleyscrypt.com. I'm also we do a podcast called discoverthehorror.com with a couple of friends of mine, which again, we go over movies and try to explore certain films that might be off the beaten path for newer fans.
Well, I appreciate your time, John. I really, really appreciate it. I love the website. I look forward to seeing you at Flashback Weekend. I hope we see a bunch of other people at Flashback Weekend, but I know we're going to have a great time there. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I'll see you in about a month at Flashback.
Sounds good. We'll be there.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
No problem.